The Galactic Concord had ruled the known universe for 12,000 years. They were a union of 47 alien species, who believed that they were the only intelligent beings in existence. Their warships numbered in the millions, their planets numbered in the thousands. Their pride was beyond measure. They had never known defeat. They had never known fear. They believed that nothing could ever challenge their power. Ambassador Vex Ari of the Tholian Dominion was sitting in his observation chamber when his sensors detected something strange. A ship was emerging from the void beyond the outer rim. This was a region of space that no species had ever crossed. It was too dangerous. It was too empty. It was too far from everything. Yet something was coming through. The ship was enormous. It was larger than any vessel the Concord had ever built. Its hull was black like the darkness between stars. It moved slowly and silently through space like a predator that did not need to rush. The ship had no markings that Vexari could recognize. It belonged to no species in any database. Vexari sent an urgent message to the Concord High Council. Within minutes, every leader of every species was watching their screens. They saw the black ship moving toward the heart of their territory. They did not know what it was. They did not know where it came from, but they knew that it was not afraid of them. On the bridge of that massive vessel stood Captain Jake Morrison. He was a tall man with gray hair and calm eyes. He had waited his entire life for this moment. His father had waited. His grandfather had waited. 7 generations of his family had prepared for this day. Now it had finally arrived. The ship was called the USS Reliance. It was the first battlecruiser that humanity had ever built for deep space travel. It carried weapons that no alien species had ever seen. It carried technology that the Concord could not understand. It carried 300 years of anger and sorrow and determination. First Officer Lisa Grant stood beside her captain. She was a woman of 40 years, with short brown hair and sharp eyes. She watched the tactical display and saw hundreds of alien signals trying to scan their ship. None of them could penetrate the hull. None of them could understand what they were seeing. Communications. Officer Amy Peters spoke from her station. She was young and nervous, but her voice was steady. She reported that they were receiving transmissions from the alien fleet. The messages were coming in 47 different languages. All of them demanded the same thing. They wanted identification. They wanted surrender. They wanted the unknown ship to stop and submit to inspection. Captain Morrison did not respond to these demands. He simply stood at the center of his bridge and looked at the stars on his view screen. He remembered the stories his grandmother had told him when he was a child. She had survived the burning of Earth. She had lost everyone she loved. She had spent her final years making sure that her grandson understood what had been taken from humanity. Lisa asked her captain what he wanted to do. Jake turned to look at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was not hatred. It was not rage. It was something colder and more patient than either of those things. It was the look of a man who had carried a burden for his entire life and was finally ready to set it down. Jake ordered Amy to open a channel to every frequency and range. He wanted his message to reach every ship and every planet and every creature that could hear it. Amy worked her controls and told him that the channel was open. The entire galaxy was listening. Jake spoke only a few words. His voice was calm and quiet, but it carried the weight of centuries. He said that they were humanity. He said that they remembered what the Concord had done to their colonies. He said that they had returned. The message spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. It reached military bases and civilian centers. It reached ancient archives where the truth had been buried and forgotten. It reached the ears of species who had never heard the word human before, and species who remembered it all too well. On the Tholian homeworld, the elders gathered in their council chamber. They had led the attack on humanity 300 years ago. They had believed it was necessary. They had believed that humans were dangerous and needed to be eliminated before they could become a threat. They had destroyed 11 colony worlds and bombed Earth until its cities were ash. They had recorded the operation as a success and moved on with their lives. Now they sat in silence and listened to that calm human voice. They looked at each other with fear in their ancient eyes. They had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that humanity was dead. They had never considered the possibility that humans could survive and rebuild. They had never imagined that they would return. Supreme Chancellor Morveth of the Veth species called for order in the High Council. He was a being of living crystal who had ruled for 800 years. He demanded to know how this was possible. He ordered his advisors to search the archives for any information about human survival capabilities. The answer came within the hour. It was buried in an old military report that no one had read in centuries. The report classified humanity as an adaptive threat level 0. This meant that humans were considered incapable of recovery after a catastrophic event. The Concord had believed that destroying their cities and colonies would end them forever. The report was wrong. The classification was wrong. Everything the Concord had believed about humanity was wrong. On the bridge of the USS Reliance, Captain Morrison watched the alien transmissions go silent one by one. The demands for surrender stopped. The threats stopped. The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath and wait. Lisa asked her captain what would happen next. Jake told her that they would wait. They would let the Concord remember. They would let them feel what humanity had felt for 300 years. They would let them understand that the universe had changed forever. Chief Engineer Sam Hughes reported from the engine room. He said that all systems were operating perfectly. The ship was ready for anything. 300 years of preparation had made the Reliance the most powerful vessel in existence. It could destroy fleets. It could crack planets. It could end civilizations. But Captain Morrison had not come to destroy. He had come to deliver a message. The message was simple. Humanity remembered. Humanity had returned. And nothing would ever be the same again. The galaxy fell into silence as the black ship moved slowly toward the heart of Concord space. No one tried to stop it. No one dared to speak. They simply watched and waited, and remembered sins they had tried to forget. 300 years before the USS Reliance emerged from the void, humanity had been a young species taking its first steps among the stars. They had discovered faster-than-light travel only 50 years earlier. They had built 12 colony worlds in distant systems. They had dreamed of a future filled with exploration and discovery, and friendship with other beings. The first alien ship they encountered belonged to the Tholian Dominion. The Tholians were tall reptilian creatures with scales of deep green and eyes like burning amber. They had been traveling the stars for 10,000 years. They looked at the small human vessel and saw something that made them afraid. They saw potential. They saw a species that learned too quickly. They saw a civilization that adapted too well. They saw a threat that would one day challenge their power, if allowed to grow. The Tholians brought their concerns to the Galactic Concord. They presented data showing how fast human technology was advancing. They showed projections of human population growth. They warned that within 1,000 years humanity would rival the oldest species in the galaxy. The Concord debated for 3 days. Some species argued for peaceful contact. They said that humanity could become a valuable member of their union. They said that fear was not a reason for violence. But these voices were few, and they were ignored. The majority voted for what they called the cleansing protocol. This was a procedure they had used before on species they considered dangerous. It involved the complete destruction of all colonies and the reduction of the homeworld to a state where recovery was impossible. The Tholians led the attack. Their fleet numbered 5,000 warships. They struck without warning on a day that humans would remember forever as the Day of Burning. The first colony to fall was New Hope. It was a small world of farmers and scientists who had no weapons and no defenses. The Tholians burned it in 6 hours. One by one the colonies fell. Mars Station, Europa Base, the settlements on Titan and Callisto, the research outposts in the asteroid belt. Each one was destroyed with cold efficiency. The Tholians did not take prisoners. They did not accept surrender. They simply erased every trace of human presence from the stars. Earth was last. The Tholians surrounded the blue planet with their warships and began the bombardment at dawn. The great cities burned. New York and London and Tokyo and Cairo. Billions of people died in the first hour. The oceans boiled. The forests turned to ash. The sky itself seemed to catch fire. The Concord recorded the operation as a success. They classified humanity as extinct and closed the file. They returned to their normal affairs and never spoke of what they had done. Within a generation, most species had forgotten that humans ever existed. But humanity was not dead. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in bunkers that had been built for exactly this possibility, millions of people survived. They had prepared for the worst, even when they hoped for the best. They had stored food and water and technology. They had saved the seeds of every plant and the genetic code of every animal. They had preserved their history and their culture and their dreams. Among the survivors was a young engineer named Daniel Morrison. He was 23 years old on the day of burning. He had watched his family die when their city was destroyed. He had crawled through the ruins to reach the nearest bunker entrance. He had arrived with burns on his hands and tears on his face and rage in his heart. Daniel made a vow on that day. He swore that humanity would survive. He swore that they would rebuild. He swore that one day they would return to the stars and make the Concorde answer for what they had done. He wrote this vow on the wall of the bunker in his own blood, and every survivor who saw it added their name below his. The years underground were hard. The first generation lived on recycled air and artificial light. They mourned their dead and raised their children in tunnels of cold stone. But they never stopped working. They built factories and laboratories. They developed new technologies. They studied the alien weapons that had fallen to Earth during the bombardment and learned their secrets. The second generation emerged to reclaim the surface. Earth was still scarred and wounded, but it was healing. Forests grew again. Animals returned. The sky cleared, and the sun shone on a world that was slowly coming back to life. The survivors built new cities, but they did not build them tall. They built them hidden and protected and ready for war. The third generation reached for the stars once more. They built ships in secret places where no alien sensor could detect them. They explored the void beyond the outer rim where no Concorde vessel had ever traveled. They found resources and built bases and continued their preparations. Generation after generation, the work continued. Parents taught their children the truth about what had happened. They showed them recordings of the day of burning. They made sure that no one would ever forget the debt that was owed. Captain Jake Morrison was born 300 years after the attack. He was a direct descendant of Daniel Morrison, who had made the vow in blood. Jake grew up knowing that his entire life had a single purpose. He trained from childhood to be a warrior. He studied tactics and strategy and leadership. He rose through the ranks of the human fleet until he was chosen to command the greatest ship ever built. The USS Reliance was the product of 3 centuries of work. Its hull was made of materials that did not exist in the periodic table. Its engines bent space and time in ways that Concorde scientists would consider impossible. Its weapons could destroy a planet or disable a ship without leaving a scratch. It was not just a battlecruiser. It was a statement. On the day the Reliance launched, Jake stood on its bridge and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He carried the hopes of every human who had ever lived. He carried the memory of every human who had died. He carried the promise that Daniel Morrison had made 300 years ago. First Officer Lisa Grant stood beside him. She came from a family of soldiers who had guarded the bunkers during the dark years. Chief Engineer Sam Hughes came from a family of builders who had constructed the new cities. Weapons Officer Danny Cole came from a family of scientists who had developed the technologies that made the Reliance possible. Every member of the crew had a story. Every member had a reason to be there. Jake gave the order to engage the engines. The Reliance moved forward into the darkness between galaxies. It crossed the void that the Concorde believed was impossible to cross. It emerged on the other side into territory that had not seen a human presence for 300 years. The galaxy that had tried to erase humanity was about to learn that some things cannot be destroyed. Some things only wait in the darkness until the time is right. And when they return, they bring with them a power that no force in the universe can stop. Admiral Zethkai of the Tholian fleet received his orders from the High Council within hours of the human broadcast. He was to assemble the combined fleet and intercept the unknown vessel. He was to capture it if possible and destroy it if necessary. He was not to allow it to reach the inner systems under any circumstances. Zethkai was old even by Tholian standards. He had served in the military for 600 years. He had fought in dozens of campaigns and won every single one. He did not believe that a single ship could threaten the power of the Concorde, no matter what technology it carried. He assembled his fleet with confidence. 10,000 warships gathered at the edge of Concorde space. They came from every member species. Tholian destroyers with their green hulls and plasma weapons, Veth cruisers made of living crystal that could repair themselves in battle, Keth carriers that launched swarms of smaller attack craft, Morvian battleships with armor so thick that no weapon had ever penetrated it. The combined fleet was the most powerful force ever assembled in galactic history. On the bridge of the USS Reliance, Captain Morrison watched them approach on the tactical display. The screen showed thousands of red dots converging on his position. Any other commander would have felt fear. Jake felt only a cold calm that had been building inside him for his entire life. Weapons Officer Danny Cole reported that all systems were ready. The ship could fire at any moment. He asked permission to engage the enemy fleet. His finger hovered over the controls that could unleash destruction on a scale the galaxy had never seen. Jake shook his head. He told Danny to stand down. He had not come here to destroy these ships. He had come to do something far more powerful. He had come to make them understand. Lisa asked what he meant. Jake turned to look at her and explained his plan. The Reliance carried a weapon that no other ship in the universe possessed. It was not a cannon, or a missile, or a beam. It was something the Concorde could never have imagined. It was a way to share memory. Human scientists had developed the technology during the long years of preparation. They had found a way to transmit experiences directly into the minds of other beings. They could make someone feel what another person had felt. They could make someone see what another person had seen. They could share the truth in a way that no words could ever match. Jake gave the order to activate the broadcast system. The Reliance sent a pulse of energy that spread across the entire sector. It touched every ship in the combined fleet. It reached into the minds of every crew member, regardless of species. And it showed them everything. Admiral Zethkai was standing on the bridge of his flagship when the pulse hit him. Suddenly, he was no longer in his own body. He was a human child on the colony world of New Hope. He was playing in a garden when the sky turned red. He felt the heat of the flames. He heard his mother screaming. He experienced the moment of his own death, as the Tholian weapons burned everything around him. Then he was someone else. He was a woman on Earth watching the bombardment begin. He was an old man in Tokyo saying goodbye to his grandchildren. He was a teenager in Cairo, running through the streets as buildings collapsed around her. He was a father in London holding his infant son as fire consumed them both. The memories came one after another. Millions of deaths experienced in moments. 300 years of grief compressed into seconds. Every crew member in the combined fleet felt it all. They felt the terror and the pain and the loss. They felt the desperation of the survivors in the bunkers. They felt the cold determination of the generations that followed. When the transmission ended, silence fell across the fleet. No one moved. No one spoke. Thousands of beings sat at their stations with tears streaming down their faces. They had just experienced the greatest crime in galactic history from the perspective of its victims. Admiral Zethkai collapsed in his command chair. His scales had turned pale and his hands were shaking. He had served in the Tholian military his entire life. He had believed that his ancestors had done the right thing. He had been taught that humans were dangerous and that the cleansing protocol was necessary for the safety of the galaxy. Now he knew the truth. He had felt the truth. The humans had not been dangerous. They had been innocent. They had been children and parents and dreamers who only wanted to explore the stars. And his species had murdered them by the billions for no reason except fear and greed. The USS Reliance moved forward through the paralyzed fleet. Not a single ship tried to stop it. Not a single weapon was fired. The most powerful military force in galactic history simply parted like water before a stone and let the human battlecruiser pass. As the Reliance moved through the fleet, it broadcast a second message. This time it was not a memory. It was a simple set of coordinates and a statement that would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. The message said that humanity could destroy them all but chose not to. The message said that representatives of all species should gather at the given coordinates. The message said that they would learn why humanity had returned. Jake watched the alien ships on his view screen as the Reliance passed them. He saw their running lights flicker and their weapons remain cold. He had accomplished what no battle could have achieved. He had not defeated the combined fleet. He had broken it. Lisa stood beside her captain and asked him how he felt. Jake was quiet for a long moment before he answered. He told her that he felt empty. He had carried rage inside himself for his entire life. Now that the moment had come, he found that rage was not enough. It could never be enough. Nothing could undo what had been done, but something else could be built. Something new could grow from the ashes of the old. That was what humanity had learned in the bunkers beneath the burned earth. Survival was not enough. Revenge was not enough. The only thing that truly mattered was what you chose to build with the time you had left. The Reliance continued on its path toward the heart of Concord space. Behind it, 10,000 warships drifted in silence. Their crews were changed forever. They would carry the weight of what they had experienced for the rest of their lives, and they would tell others. They would spread the truth that had been hidden for 300 years. The galaxy was waking up to a nightmare it had tried to forget, and humanity was there to make sure it never forgot again. The coordinates that humanity broadcast led to a place called the Nexus. It was an ancient station at the very center of the galaxy, where the Galactic Concord had been founded 12,000 years ago. The station orbited a black hole that had been stabilized by technology so old that no one remembered how it worked. It was the most sacred place in Concord space. For 3,000 years, the Nexus had been used only for ceremonial purposes. The full assembly of all 47 species had not gathered there since the founding era. But when the human message arrived, every species understood that they had no choice. They had to attend. They had to face what was coming. Ships began arriving within days. Thousands of vessels carrying diplomats and leaders and witnesses. They came from every corner of the galaxy. They came with fear in their hearts and shame on their faces. The memory transmission had spread beyond the combined fleet. Recordings had been made and shared. Billions of beings across the galaxy now knew what had been done to humanity. The USS Reliance arrived last. It moved through the assembled fleet like a shadow passing through light. No one challenged it. No one questioned its right to be there. The black ship took its position above the Nexus station and waited. Captain Jake Morrison prepared to descend to the surface with a small delegation. He chose his companions carefully. First, Officer Lisa Grant would come to represent the military. Chief Engineer Sam Hughes would come to represent the builders. Communications Officer Amy Peters would come to represent the young generation that would inherit whatever future was created today. And one more person would join them. Her name was Dr. Maria Santos. She was the leading historian of humanity, and she carried a single data crystal in her hand. That crystal contained the truth that would change everything. The shuttle descended through the station's atmosphere shields and landed on a platform overlooking the central chamber. Jake stepped out first and looked at the scene before him. Thousands of alien dignitaries filled the massive hall. Creatures of every shape and size and color imaginable. Some had scales, some had fur, some had crystalline bodies or gaseous forms or mechanical shells. All of them were watching the small group of humans with eyes full of fear and wonder. Jake walked to the center of the chamber where a speaking platform had been prepared. His footsteps echoed in the silence. He climbed the platform and looked out at the assembly. For a long moment he said nothing. He simply let them look at him. He let them see that humans were real. He let them understand that their greatest fear had come true. Then Maria stepped forward. She was a small woman with gray hair and gentle eyes. She did not look like a warrior or a conqueror. She looked like a grandmother. But when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the chamber, and her words carried the weight of history. She began by telling them about humanity. Not the threat they had imagined, but the reality they had destroyed. She spoke of human artists who had painted beauty, and musicians who had created songs that could make people weep with joy. She spoke of human philosophers who had asked questions about the meaning of existence and scientists who had sought to understand the universe. She told them about the colony worlds. New Hope had been founded by farmers who wanted to grow food among the stars. Europa Base had been a research station where scientists studied the oceans of distant moons. Each colony had its own character and its own dreams. Each one had been full of people who simply wanted to live and love and build something meaningful. Then Maria began to read the names. She read the names of the children who had died on New Hope. She read them slowly and clearly, one after another. There were 40,000 names on that list alone. She read every single one while the assembly sat in silence. After the children of New Hope came the children of the other colonies. After the colonies came the children of Earth. 47 million names in total. Maria did not read them all. That would have taken years. But she read enough. She read for 6 hours while the alien dignitaries listened and wept. When she finished reading names, she activated the data crystal. A holographic display appeared above the platform showing documents and recordings and evidence. This was the true history of the cleansing protocol. This was the proof that the Concord had buried and forgotten. The official record claimed that humanity had been destroyed because they were dangerous. The documents showed that this was a lie. The real reason was economic. Human technology was advancing so fast that it threatened to disrupt established trade networks. Human population growth meant they would need resources that other species wanted. The elder races had looked at humanity and seen competitors. They had chosen to eliminate the competition before it could challenge them. Supreme Chancellor Morveth rose from his seat. His crystalline body flickered with colors that showed his distress. He tried to speak. He tried to offer some explanation or defense. But there was nothing to say. The evidence was undeniable. The crime was clear. His ancestors had murdered billions of innocent beings for profit. Maria turned off the display and looked out at the assembly. She told them that humanity had spent 300 years preparing for this moment. They had built weapons that could destroy the entire Concord. They had developed technology that made them more powerful than any force in galactic history. They had every right and every ability to take revenge. She paused and let her words sink in. The alien dignitaries sat frozen with terror. They expected her to announce the beginning of the end. They expected death and destruction on a scale that would make the cleansing protocol look merciful. But Maria did not announce war. Instead, she asked a simple question. She asked what revenge would accomplish. She asked if more death would bring back the children whose names she had read. She asked if burning alien worlds would heal the scars on Earth. She asked if hatred was truly the legacy that humanity wanted to leave behind. The assembly had no answer. They simply stared at the small human woman who held their fate in her hands. And they waited to learn what humanity had decided. Captain Jake Morrison stepped forward to stand beside Dr. Maria Santos. He looked out at the thousands of alien faces watching him. He saw their fear. He saw their guilt. He saw beings who expected to die and believed they deserved it. For a moment he felt the old rage stir inside him. These were the descendants of the creatures who had murdered his ancestors. These were the inheritors of the civilization that had tried to erase humanity from existence. But the rage did not last. It faded as quickly as it had come. Jake had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. He had trained for war. He had studied tactics of destruction. He had learned 100 ways to bring death to his enemies. Yet standing here now he understood something that all those preparations had never taught him. Revenge was easy. Mercy was hard. And humanity had never chosen the easy path. Jake began to speak. His voice was calm and steady. It carried across the great chamber and was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. Billions of beings heard his words. They would remember them for the rest of their lives. He told them that 300 years ago the Concord had tried to end humanity. They had burned human cities and murdered human children. They had believed that they could erase humanity from history, as if they had never existed. They had failed. Humanity had survived in the darkness beneath the earth. They had rebuilt in secret. They had grown stronger than anyone could have imagined. Now they had returned with the power to do to the Concord what the Concord had done to them. They could burn every alien world. They could kill every alien child. They could make the galaxy as empty and silent as the ruins of Earth had been. Jake paused and looked at the assembly. He saw tears on faces that had never wept before. He saw guilt in eyes that had never felt shame. The power of this moment was absolute. He could speak a single word, and the USS Reliance would begin a war that would end only when every member species of the Concorde was extinct. But that was not why humanity had returned. Jake told them that revenge was not enough. It could never be enough. Killing billions of aliens would not bring back the humans who had died. Destroying their worlds would not heal the wounds that had scarred the Earth. Hatred was a fire that consumed everything, including those who carried it. He told them that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their determination. It had been their capacity to choose something better. Even in the darkest moments of their history, humans had found ways to forgive. They had built bridges across the chasms of hatred. They had chosen mercy when revenge would have been easier. That was what made them human. That was what had allowed them to survive. And that was what they were choosing now. Jake announced that humanity would not seek reparations. They would not demand territory, or tribute, or punishment. They would not burn a single world, or take a single life. The Concorde had done terrible things, but two wrongs would never make a right. Instead, humanity asked for only one thing. They asked the galaxy to remember. Dr. Maria Santos stepped forward again. She held a small container in her hands. Inside the container was a single plant with delicate blue flowers. It was called a forget-me-not. It was one of the last surviving specimens of a species that had grown on Earth before the burning. Maria told them that humans had tended this flower in their underground bunkers for 300 years. They had kept it alive as a reminder of what they had lost. Now they were offering it as a gift. She asked every member species to take seeds from this plant and grow them on their worlds. She asked them to build gardens where these flowers would bloom. She asked them to inscribe the names of the human children who had died on stones placed among the flowers. She asked them to visit these gardens and remember what their ancestors had done. Forgiveness was possible. Forgetting was not. The galaxy had to carry the weight of this knowledge forever. That was the only justice that truly mattered. Maria placed the container on the speaking platform and stepped back. The assembly sat in stunned silence. They had expected war and death. They had received mercy and flowers. They did not know how to respond. Supreme Chancellor Morveth rose slowly from his seat. His crystalline body was dim with shame. He walked to the platform and knelt before the two humans. He spoke in a voice that cracked with emotion. He said that the Concorde did not deserve this mercy. He said that his species and all the others should pay for what they had done. He begged the humans to punish them because they could not bear the weight of forgiveness. Jake looked down at the ancient being kneeling before him. He told Morveth that punishment was easy to bear. It ended. It faded. Eventually it was forgotten. But guilt, carried by choice, was eternal. It would pass from generation to generation. It would shape the soul of every species that remembered. That was humanity's true vengeance. Not death, but memory. Not destruction, but the burden of knowing what they had done, and what humans had chosen not to do. The USS Reliance powered down its weapons. The black ship turned away from the Nexus, and began moving toward the void from which it had come. Humanity was leaving. They were returning to their hidden places beyond the outer rim. They would watch from the darkness and wait to see what the galaxy would become. Jake gave one final message as his ship departed. He told the Concorde that humanity would return one day. When they did, they would judge the galaxy by what they found. If the memorial gardens were tended and the names were remembered, then perhaps there could be a future together. If not, then humanity would know that mercy had been wasted on species that could not change. The Reliance vanished into the darkness between stars. The galaxy fell into silence. In the years that followed, everything changed. The Concorde dissolved its military fleets and redirected resources toward healing and preservation. Memorial gardens were planted on every member world. The forget-me-not flowers spread across the galaxy, becoming a symbol of shame and hope and the possibility of redemption. Whenever a species grew too proud or contemplated cruelty, an elder would take them to the gardens. They would tell the story of the human battlecruiser that came with the power to destroy everything and chose to plant flowers instead. They would read the names of the children, carved in stone. They would ask if the listener wanted to add more names to that list or help ensure that no names would ever need to be added again. The galaxy that had once been filled with arrogance learned humility. The species that had once been quick to violence learned restraint. The civilization that had tried to erase humanity was transformed by the memory of human mercy, and somewhere in the void beyond the outer rim, humanity watched and waited. They tended their own gardens where human names were carved in stone. They raised their children with stories of what had been lost and what had been chosen. They hoped that one day the galaxy would prove worthy of the gift they had given. The silence that fell after the departure of the Reliance was not the silence of fear or death. It was the silence of reflection. It was the silence of species learning for the first time what it truly meant to be civilized. It was the silence of a galaxy that had finally begun to understand the weight of its own history. And in that silence, the forget-me-not flowers bloomed blue and bright on 1,000 worlds. They would bloom forever as a reminder of the day when humanity could have destroyed everything and chose to forgive instead. That was the true power of humanity. Not their weapons or their ships or their technology, but their capacity to look at the beings who had murdered their children and say that hatred was not the answer. That mercy was stronger than revenge, that the future mattered more than the past. The galaxy remembered. And in remembering, they became something better than they had ever been before.